Well, welcome to this breakout session. Can I introduce myself? Richard Henson from the University of Worcester. I'm part of the IASME consortium, which consists of Danny Dresner from NCC, David Booth, retired information assurance consultant for government, and myself. The actual project itself was funded by the Technology Strategy Board in 2009 and is now about to come to fruition. There's quite a lot of background to it, which I'll probably introduce you as we go, but if I just start with the first well, actually, I better stop there. That's a little bit about me. It'd be useful to know everybody's background in this room so I can pitch the presentation accordingly, because I'm aware that some of you will be academics, some of you will be practitioners, some of you will be sort of a bit of both knowledge transfer. So could I have an indication, those of you who are academics, okay, and those who are sort of interested in the SME community or the larger business community? Okay, that's interesting. Okay, because, well, IASME was designed for the business community. I suppose that the idea started way back in about 2007 with, I should say that we all should be here today, but my colleagues have been sort of going down with various bugs as time's gone, so that's why I'm left to hold the fort. So I'll tell you a bit about my original input, and then possibly sort of my colleagues would say that what their input would be, and I'll try and bring that in as well. But I was enabled to have 25% of my time at the University of Worcester as a knowledge transfer fellow in information security way back in 2007, and that enabled me to have some time to engage with the local business community, also engage with the cybersecurity network, and that included the cybersecurity network we have here now. It was a slightly different form back in 2007, but it was still equally inspiring as I found it already today. So that's where it started, and right from the outset I was aware that there was some sort of difference between what was happening as far as support for larger businesses was concerned and support for the small and medium-sized enterprises. And I remember talking to some colleagues at Kinetic about this, and we agreed, oh yes, what we need is training for small businesses. The small businesses don't seem to be very aware of information security, and they need some assistance, need some training. So sure enough, we got together, worked out what we thought was a great training scheme, great introductory scheme, and we had a sort of an initial workshop which was well attended, and then no further interest. It was probably a bit unfortunate because that time was around about November 2008, and that was when the recession got really bad, but nevertheless, we would have expected a bit more interest. And subsequent to that, some of my colleagues at the University of Worcester kindly did some research into, well, how interested really small businesses were in doing those sort of training courses. And we found that, well, they didn't seem to be that interested in doing these superb training courses that we were attained to put on with Kinetic, but also they didn't seem to understand too much about information security either. And so the dilemma was, well, do we just leave it there, or do we actually sort of try to move forward in some way to try and support small businesses, even though there's a recession going on, and even though they may think they've got other priorities? Well, around about the same time, the Technology Strategy Board actually offered a competition for ideas, and that was when I met up with Daniel Dresner from the NCC and David Booth, who had previously been at GCHQ. On separate occasions, and we spoke at length. I found Danny was absolutely knew everything there was to know about standards. Any information security standard, he'd studied it, he'd done something about it as part of his PhD, so he really was the guru, and is the guru about standards. And yet he felt that there wasn't anything that fitted what was needed for SMEs. David Booth, he came from a BS 7799 background, so he actually helped to write the ISO 27001 standard. And so he was aware, well, he said, but it was scalable for SMEs. That was intention from the start, that it would be scalable. But in practice, the way it was written, the way it's interpreted, the way it's used, then probably it isn't that accessible to SMEs. Wouldn't it be nice if something could be done about it to engender the principles, the very good principles of ISO 27001, such as the four-stage model, the PDCA cycle, but in a way that SMEs could engage with it. So we put a proposal into the Technology Strategy Board, the three of us, and we were successful. And I think we were probably successful because we made it clear that SMEs are part of the UK's infrastructure for security and therefore for cyber security. That all SMEs are part of a supply chain that belongs to governments, belongs to larger businesses, belongs to NHS and so on. So there's a whole network of computer networks around the country that are run by SMEs that will link into larger networks. And if we're talking about cybersecurity across the whole country, then it wouldn't be very sensible to exclude the SMEs. And I think what the statistics are something like 95% of companies in this country are SMEs in any case. So that's the background. That's how IASME, Information Assurance for SMEs, came about in the first place. My role was for doing the underpinning research. David was putting that research into a new model, and Danny was project leading and sort of doing the standard side of it to make sure that the standard that would emerge was robust and fitted in with what was already out there. So that's where we started from. And so the idea is to supply some help for SMEs. SMEs think they don't need help until something goes wrong. And then who do they call? Well, it's too late. We've been working with some colleagues at the University of Wolverhampton Business Park recently. I had a very good example of a small business that was doing just fine, and then they had a server crash, probably due to some of the sort of cyber beasties that Tony was talking about earlier. Anyway, it crashed and it couldn't be easily backed up, couldn't be easily recovered. Eventually they got some specialist in to actually manage to get it working again after 4 days. And I asked the colleague how much that had cost them in that 4 days in terms of, and he said that 3 days they couldn't trade. 3 days their workers were doing nothing. 3 days the whole company was completely dead. And I know that academics have done research on businesses and actually how long it would take for a business, small business or a larger business, to be out of business before they can't get their customers back, before the customers are so disappointed with them that they won't engage with them again. And that's apparently about 10 days. And this company was there for 3 or 4 days, so the company did recover and they got their customer base back, and they're all doing rather well. But perhaps that was quite a warning. And in terms of the cost of that breach, he was talking about £20,000, something like that. And well, if something like a small business scheme that costs, say, something like £2,000 to £3,000 a year, then if you could say that, okay, we only have a breach once every 10 years, then that would actually pay for itself. And I found that SMEs, although they don't necessarily engage with the educational arguments, as soon as you start talking money, then it makes quite a difference. And that there is quite a lot of academic work in recent years, something called the economics of information security. There's actually supplied quite a lot of supportive evidence that if companies spend money wisely on information security in advance, then they don't get the data breaches, or if they do get the data breaches, they can be up and running more quickly afterwards. And at a time in the future when the Information Commissioner does come down really hard on companies, they can say, well, we've done this. And the Information Commissioner say, okay, you've done all you can, and we won't fine you too much this time. Anyway, so that's the that's the background, that's the intention for IASME, that we'll be there for the small business if they need us, but try to convince them to be ready in advance for all the nasty things that Tony spoke about in the first session that's out there. It's only going to get worse. The number of hackers, the range of hacking is only going to get bigger, and small businesses really need to engage with this sooner rather than later. And we are aware of the financial constraints at the moment, and we are trying to work with them. So if I can just take you through the consortium as it is. I think I mentioned there's three of us. There were originally 4 people involved. The fourth one, Stephen Hatfield, after the first 2 years, he took on another project elsewhere. He was a former colleague of David's. So it's the 3 of us working, as I say, working on the research, working on the, engaging with the SMEs scheme itself and the standards part of it. So funded by the Technology Strategy Board. Now that funding has finished now, so we've got to be self-funding from now on. So whatever advice, whatever support, whatever assessments we provide for small businesses, they've got to be self-funding. If Daniel was here, he would explain the funding model to you in some detail. But that's not my side of it, I'm afraid, so please forgive me for sort of sticking to the parts that of IASME that I'm familiar with. So David has developed the model itself, based loosely on ISO 27001, because of course he was involved there when it was BS 7799, and the NCC and Daniel have been involved in actually making sure it's a robust certification. The research itself, our own research at Worcester actually sort of looked at all the academic research around the UK and around Europe, and to some extent in the States and the Far East, and also private companies. There's a lot of private research out there, and they're basically saying the same thing. It's the same message that small businesses are, well, low down the agenda as far as national picture, and that they themselves aren't sort of engaging and aren't willing to engage with the magnitude of the task that may well be facing them. We also came across the security advice for SMEs provided by Lacey and James. I think it was a paper they wrote for the ICO, which basically we felt complemented what we'd already researched, so it was good to see that other people coming from a different angle actually were coming to more or less the same conclusions. So that sort of helped us to think that we were doing the right thing. Sometimes you wonder if you are, but we all seem to be using the same evidence in a similar sort of way, but from a different angle. Okay, so SMEs then. Different, quite different from larger organisations, possibly in more ways than the traditional information security people working for government would necessarily think. There's a whole list of things, I better read them all out. Staff loyalty, small number of well-controlled physical spaces, clear business focus, no staff with dedicated IT or security responsibilities, little understanding of information security, and no spare cash for non-essentials. So that last one in particular, we think information security is essential. We're pretty sure that information security is essential, but the business that has never actually had any downtime and never actually lost any business or had staff sitting around doing nothing for hours on end don't maybe see it that way yet. Incidentally, talking about research from private organisations, I think it was Symantec last year estimated that the average cost, and this is probably mainly an American study, the average cost of a data breach to an organisation of all sizes, sort of averaging it down, was about $19,000. So certainly.
Was that 19 or 90?
So 19,000, I think it was 18,800, something like that. So quite a lot involved. We did look at what was out there, because we wouldn't want to be reinventing the wheel. If it was already there, good practice there, we want to build on that, work with it, and communicate with the people involved. The ENISA model, that's a European model that had been, to some extent, pruned down for SMEs. We looked at that, and that did give us some useful background, useful information, but again, it fell short of what we were looking for, certainly fell short of what David was hoping for, to recreate the BS 7799 ISMS model for SMEs. And we did use the American Carnegie Mellon model in terms of the maturity process. We take the idea that an information security management system evolves. That's the whole point behind the ISO 27001 model, is that it's continuous improvement. So the SME needs to start somewhere. They may not have an ISMS to start with, but they can gradually, incrementally, they can improve it. And the idea behind the Carnegie Mellon model was that they can incrementally improve. And there's a scoring method that can actually sort of pick up that improvement and can be fed back to them that they are doing the right thing, they are really sort of heading towards where they should be. So the process for the SME, would contact one of myself or colleagues, usually through the NCC, and there'd be a process of registration, meeting and discussing what sort of business, and then a visit to the employer's premises and a look at their risk profile, and difficult to read here, preparation and self-assessment. The idea there is the collection of evidence for getting some sort of certification. I should say that the IASME is a process, but it's also a certification process as well. And back to the maturity model, it's possible that an SME hasn't got sufficient to be graded at all. But if they've got something of what's needed, it'll be a bronze. If they've got quite a lot of what's needed, it might well be a silver. If they've got most of what is needed, then it could be a gold. And if they've got the gold, they might say, well, this is continuous improvement. Where do we go from here? And with the next stage then will be the full-blown ISO 27001. And indeed, we've worked with 2 or 3 ISO 27001 providers to enable that further maturity to occur for those small businesses who are really grasping the nettle and really want to get really robust with their information security. So that's all done in these face-to-face meetings, and then there's the more intensive day with an IASME assessor and the small business to actually review information security right across the business. And as a result of that day, then the assessor will present the IASME grade, if you like, that they feel is appropriate. And I have to say that there is a moderation process, so there'll be an IASME assessor, there'll also be an IASME moderator who will check the assessor, and the two of them agree the grade between them, so it's not just one person. And as I said, they are awarded either nothing, we haven't had to do that yet to any businesses, or bronze, silver or gold. And then continuous improvement, I must keep emphasising that we do use the PDCA model to continually improve the business, so there's an annual review. And I think probably the first of the businesses that got the IASME award will be soon coming up for their first review. So the purpose is that it's scalable with a business focus using international security standards with a core of achievable security measures and a risk profile that determines implementation requirements. The certification recognises security achievements with continuous improvements towards full international standards if required. And there's a picture of what an IASME certificate looks like. risk profiling, I think, yes, Tony mentioned risk profiling at the end of his presentation, the importance of a good risk management process. And in our experience, then, it's something that SMEs find particularly difficult to engage with. So we have got sort of, if you like, a two-level approach. If it's a fairly sort of small and non-complex business, we can use a self-assessment process. If there's something a little bit more complex or a number of different sites involved and possibly more employees, then we use something a little more sophisticated. But it's something that we're working on all the time. As part of my own research, I'm looking to develop a model for SMEs rather than for larger organisations that will actually make the process much, much easier and hopefully pleasurable for the business. Because one thing that's come out of this is that a business that may not necessarily be focused on information security can become focused on it once they see how it fits into their business model. And that's one thing that IASME, I wouldn't say forces, but encourages the business to do, is to look down into its business processes, and they have to do that in order to establish which process is at most a risk. So which processes need to be sort of controlled most robustly. Okay, so there's a whole range here of different generalizations about risk that could be made. Again, reading them through very quickly. Staff numbers, contractor numbers, business locations, physical security, environmental requirements, management responsibility, legal issues, ICT complexity, business change, internet use, partner access, home and remote working, risk tolerance, threat knowledge, information value, and ICT value. So quite a lot of, and that's why for a smaller business it's not really necessary to go through all those systematically in that way. I should say that initially we were expecting to have a longer session here, so we were going to have a breakout. A part of the breakout session would be an exercise for you, but because it was curtailed, then, and because David can't be here anyway, that's not going to be possible. So I better press on. We've only got 15 minutes left already. So 3 different risk profiles: simple, which is generally low and medium risk factors; intermediate with some higher risk factors; and complex with medium and high risk factors. It just helps to sort of to categorize for enabling the risk process, the risk appetite of the business to be engaged with more closely. And so flexible assessment, policy and procedures, that the business, we hope, should be able to do that themselves. So we do provide templates for businesses who want to sort of a bit of a helping hand with that, but we do leave the businesses to get on with the policy bit themselves and the procedures bit, but it's still marked very much as part of the overall thing. The control matrix is for the more complex businesses. So it's based on ISMS, which is taking best practice of ISO 2701 and any other international standard. I think there's a certain amount of, well, you were probably mostly familiar with PCI DSS, and that's the credit card's information security system. And that there was an example a couple of years ago of a company having the necessary sort of standard of PCI DSS, and then getting hacked and then getting breached, and other people saying, well, that's not a very good system then, is it? If they've jumped through all the hoops and passed all the tests, and they've still got breached. And of course, the answer was quite a simple one, that at the time that they were assessed, then everything was robust, but of course things moved on, and 9 months later, I think, was when they got the breach. And then various other things had happened in the world, and they hadn't kept up with them. So the problem is, with a tick box approach like that, then it's going to, particularly with the dynamic thing like information security, then they're going to get caught out. The strength of having the ISMS, the Information Security Management System, if you like, helps to mitigate against that, and I'm sure it's something that the ICO would be keen to see happening, even with small businesses. I mean, there's no reason why a small business shouldn't have a management system for that. Small businesses, we find, are very keen to get ISO 9001, quite keen to get ISO 14001, which is the environmental standard, and the health and safety standard 18001. It comes to the information security standard, oh, well, that looks a bit difficult, you know. But it's still the same basic principles, the PDCA model. So we think that's a strength of IASME, that we are sticking to ISMS and we are sticking to the good principles of the ISO in that respect. Okay, nothing too much more about that to cover. The scoring, there's 6 levels altogether if you include 0. 6 levels of scoring for each of the criteria that we use for our assessment. So there's level 1 will be minimal, level 2 in use, level 3 managed, level 4 controlled, and level 5 optimized. Again, going with the tradition of ISO and continuous improvement. Assessment topics, I don't want to dwell again too much on them because I'm well aware that we've only got 10 minutes left now, other than to say that it embraces the same areas as ISO 27001. We didn't think any of them could be left out because all of them were important. Or some of them could be very important as far as a particular SME is concerned. Other SMEs could find out that it doesn't really apply to them, but they need to be considered in all cases, particularly with the business continuity and e-commerce. The assessment exercise would now follow if we had 2 of us here and we had the necessary worksheets have been printed and everything, but I'll just talk you through it. That's probably the easiest way, and people can ask me questions as we go through it. But the idea is that you simulate you being an assessor and an SME, and you'll see then how the process actually works in practice. That's the idea. So, and then as a result of going through the process, you could decide whether it would be a bronze or a silver or a gold, or perhaps not quite there yet. So if I can just come through. That's just the address at NCC to contact if you wish to do so. IASME have our own website, nice and simple, iasme.co.uk. We tried to put things on there as soon as possible afterwards. We're going through a revamp of the look and feel of the front page and navigation at the moment, but everything is there. It's just that it's trying to make it more easily accessible and a bit more exciting at first glance. iasme.co.uk. And that's the end of the slideshow. So the next thing is the self-assessment exercise and what we had planned for you. Now, you can't read that. It's basically, what we've taken is some of the components of some of the SMEs that we've worked with over the past 2 years and put it together as a typical SME in a typical scenario with typical strengths and weaknesses of their current information security. So it's written down there, general information about the company, about how it uses the cloud, how it uses remote access, what's it like in terms of security awareness, and so on. Assets and access to the system, physical and environmental, computer and networking procedures, electronic commerce, malware, incident management, and recovery. So they're all covered in the scenario. So the business, well, the business wouldn't provide that. That would happen as a result of the initial visits by the assessor. So the assessor would come out with this as a summary of where the business is at the moment. And the task would then be, here's the business, what level are they at the moment? So if I can just minimize that one and go on to that one, I think. Yes, okay. So, again, it's difficult for you to see because it's possible. That would be a typical template then for a small business who really, and we found this, the survey that we've done, and it basically, it complements surveys done by BERR in 2008, 2009, that certainly less than half SMEs have got a current, coherent information security policy, which is very worrying. So, and we did find businesses that didn't have an information security policy, say, no problem, there's your template, and it's just simply, well, not so simply because it needs to be carefully thought out, but it needs to be filling in the blanks, filling in the gaps, bearing in mind the particular specific needs of that business. Because as we've found time and time again, each SME is unique. It's not a good idea to assume anything about the SME and its business processes and its external partners. So the idea is information security policy. Company might have a problem, then give them a template. No matter what, when the assessor comes back, it's possible to assess the information security policy and grade it. So there we are. Maximum score, remember, is a 5. If it's a good policy in terms of what's actually required, then it'll be 4 to 5. If it's a fair policy, it'll be a 2 or a 3. Or if it's a poor policy at the moment, it will be a 1. Now, I'm not going to take you through all of these, but there are a whole range of different sections. For example, here's one on legislation. And again, the same principle. The SME submits the evidence about how they're complying with legislation, and then the assessor would decide through scoring whether it's a good, 4 to 5, fair, 2 to 3, poor, 0 to 1. And personnel security, information awareness and so on, intellectual property rights. So a lot of these you'll find in ISO 27001, but in perhaps not on such an easily accessible way. So everything that's there in 27001 is here in IASME, but say we like to think in a more accessible way. We're all great advocates of ISO 27001, incidentally. So we're not sort of rivaling it, we're not trying to sort of take over it or anything like that. We all think it's great, but SMEs can't engage with it or have difficulty engaging with it. Some SMEs, I know, engage with it very well, but there's no reason why IASME shouldn't take them some of the way to the international standard in any case. And I probably need to stop there because there's about 5 minutes left for people to talk to me about it, because this is the first time we've actually gone north of West Midlands to talk about IASME. So it's been 2 years in development. We used 15 pilot SMEs, of which we had 3 who were able to award gold and silver standards to. Others are still working through it. As ever, it's a case of finding time. We're able to support them earlier on, but as I say, we're out of funding now. But those businesses that have got the silvers and got the golds, then certainly have found it a very valuable process. So it's the first time we've taken it out of our region. So I hope I've given you enough of a flavour of what it's about. So please ask me questions, and I'll try to be as honest about it.
More of a comment than a question.
Yes, yes.
One of the major differences between corporates and SMEs is that corporates deploy governance, regulation, compliance, and data security strategically. SMEs tend to do it tactically. Right?
Yes.
They're bidding for a contract or they're having it imposed on them as part of a contractual obligation because they're part of an extended supply chain.
Yes.
I like the self-assessment because it gets them into that process without going through something that might take months, if not years, when they need a quick tactical solution to that problem.
Yes, certainly. We certainly, I mean, one of the reasons why SMEs wanted to engage with us is because of supply chain pressures. Because someone had said that if you want to apply for this contract, then you need to have evidence that you're actually approaching the matter of information security sort of seriously. And
plus we know from our own end users that they don't see the relevance of these major standards to themselves. The reason for that is it takes so long to write and design and get these standards published that in a fast-moving threat landscape, by the time the standards are, the problems have changed. So for an SME, that's particular. You have to think and move very quickly because they think tactically rather than strategically. They don't see the relevance of standards that take years to achieve.
Well, the nice thing about IASME, it doesn't take years to achieve. If we take Business X, okay, based in Worcester, for example, they achieved gold within 5 or 6 months of our first interview.
Still too long.
Still? Okay.
If they've got to think tactically, they've got to win this contract.
Okay.
Some kind of accreditation.
Yeah.
As your introduction says, who do they call?
Well, it's down. I mean, if they need that contract that much, they'll be prepared to put the human resources into actually doing it. I mean, this particular business, that the guy was doing it almost in his spare time. And that's why it took him the 5 to 6 months to do it. If the company had seen it as a priority, you'd like to think that they'd say, okay, you can have some time to make sure you bring the company up to some sort of respectable standard that will look good on the contract or on the bid for the contract. And IASME is, I mean, I think it's acknowledged by, certainly when we were launched in April, then the ICO were aware of it, and the ICO gave a keynote speech, so that they're well aware of what we're doing. And one way to look at information security for SMEs is, well, you know, they can get away with it at the moment. Everybody, apparently, almost everybody can get away with it at the moment, but the ICO are getting more staff, are getting sort of tighter legislation. Let's go back to the Road Traffic Act. Let's go back to cars, how safe the roads were, how many thousands of deaths on the roads, and how that's contracted in the last 30 years as the laws have been more severely imposed on road users. And I mean, as I've said before, it would be nice to think that in 10 years' time, then it would be possible for a company to infringe have a data breach, quite a serious one, but it's their first offence, and the ICO say, well, this time we'll let you off, but you've got to go on a one-day course, and then after that one-day course, you won't get any points on your equivalent of a information security safety license. You see where I'm getting at?
Yeah, I'd like to see more. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I've got 2 questions. The
Yes.
first one is, related to what you've already been saying, is how recognised is this as a certificate? If we as SMEs quizzes us and says, well, we've got IASME 2 silver standard, and
Yeah.
they're going to know what that means, and they're going to say, well, yeah, what's that?
Well, it compares with ISO 27001. I mean, people understand ISO 27001. But that is the literally sort of gold, in fact, the platinum standard. Yeah. Now, there's ISO 27001, but there's not much else. There's various sets of guidelines available for businesses, and there's possibly other standards that are emerging, but what else is there? They have to, I mean, like you're saying about a contract in a fairly short space of time, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get to ISO 27001 in a short space of time. Almost impossible, particularly because of the model involved. But something like IASME, they could achieve that. They could achieve, let's say, bronze or silver, and that would count for something. That is, they can tell the world they've got an information security management system. that complies with the PDCA model if anybody wants to ask them. And that's much more that would be available with something like PCI DSS or anything like that.
And the second question is, I
Yeah.
appreciate this is a bit like how long's a piece of string, but
Okay.
how much are we talking about for a cost for an SME?
Right, the cost is 2,800. That would be the initial assessment. And then, as I said, there's a reassessment after a year. And I've forgotten the exact cost of that. And I think that's probably a quarter of that. I don't quote me on figures. I say Daniel is the person who's worked out the business model.
Is that along the lines of, because you might go into a business, they might tick all, you might get 9 out of 10 first time through.
Yes.
They get 1 out of 10 where you say you've got this, and this, and this,
Mhm.
you know, have to come back. So is the 2,800 irrespective of where the business is, or is that?
It's the process, because as you can, I mean, I took you through it very quickly, but it's quite a robust process. It's quite a thorough process. We think it needs to be a reasonably thorough process, because if the business misses something out and then they get breached, then what's the good of it in the first place? And every business is unique. Every business has its own processes. That really does need to be systematically worked out, no matter which information security system is being imposed. So, but it will take some time. If it's an instant fix, then one has to be skeptical about the sort of how good it's going to be, because it needs to be engaged with the unique, and I'm sure you're all aware, probably more than I am, that each SME is unique. And each SME's got its own unique problems and challenges and so on. Yes?
You likened it there to the Road Traffic Act. I mean, how far do you think we're down the road to legislation being imposed on us to that extent?
We've still got an awful long way to go. We're probably in the equivalent of, I don't know, I shouldn't speculate here, but let's say sort of the 1930s, 1940s, sort of, we haven't quite got the equivalent of a driving license yet, have we? But it is moving forward. And why was it that the highway code moved forward so quickly? Because of demand from the public in the end, because people were dying on the roads, and because it was so. And I think there was an opportunity when there was, I think it was 26 million records went missing, or allegedly went missing, and that was on the media, and that was a big opportunity because there was a public outcry, and sort of things have died down.
It's the dying down. I mean, does government have the impetus now to do something about it? And is the government department there pushing this through and making it something important factor?
Well, you heard what Tony had to say in his keynote. Not only have you got the professional hackers, you've got the amateur hackers, and you've got the sort of the supposedly state-sponsored hackers, and it's not going to get smaller. It's getting bigger all the time, and the number of ways in are potentially bigger all the time. And the other thing, I think larger businesses are realising that their own systems are vulnerable through their third-party suppliers. And it's been shown, Verizon showed that 30% of all breaches in 2009 were caused through third parties, through partners, through business partners, if you like.
So which report was that?
That's Verizon. It's there's a link to it from the front page of the IASME website. Okay. But yeah, that was quite shocking actually. And that was, that was a presentation that I heard at the InfoSec 2009. So it was presented by the VP of the company. So I think you can say that was a pretty sort of accurate figure. And that's a lot of alarm bells for large companies, and that's probably why you see a lot of large companies are now putting these contract stipulations of having some sort of information security evidence. And when I say that IASME is evidence-based. A company can't get an IASME certification without providing the evidence, about the evidence being sort of clearly scrutinised, and it's updated on an annual basis, like ISO 27001. So I've spoken a lot. Yes?
No, I was just saying we're rapidly approaching 10 past, I'm afraid, Richard.
Yeah. Sure.
Sorry to interrupt the flow, guys, but we need to get back to 10. Thank you, Richard. That was absolutely fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll be happy to talk about it over lunch or any other session later on in the day.